Hey y'all, as promised, I'm going to show y'all how to make my old-fashioned coconut cake. Get ready for the best tasting cake you've ever had in your life. Let's get started. First, you're going to want to start out by preheating your oven to 350 degrees. Now we're going to have to grease our cake pans. I'm using 3 9-inch cake pans. You can use 8-inch if you would like. And I'm going to take this Crisco here and I'm going to spread it around all over the bottom and the sides, giving it a light, even coating. And next I'll take me some flour and do another light coating over the top of the Crisco. This is a foolproof way to make sure your cakes never stick, and I promise you, guarantee 100%, they will never stick. This is trustworthy, more trustworthy than the spray bacon grease. Now you can use sugar instead of flour if you want to for a more sweeter brown crust if you would like, but I recommend flour because it's going to make the cake soft. It's not going to have a hard crust on it. If you put the sugar on too soon, that Crisco will melt the sugar and your cake won't release as well as it would with flour. So if you're going to use sugar, make sure you put it on right before you pour the batter in. And you see me here shaking around the flour and getting it evenly coated. And this is a messy step. This is what the pan's going to look like when you're done greasing it. This is a very important step, so don't skip it. Now I'm going to show you how to prep the flour for the cake. You're going to need 2½ cups of cake flour, 1 teaspoon of sea salt, a ½ teaspoon of baking soda, and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And you can either buy cake flour or you can make your own. I made my own, so I've done 2½ cups of all-purpose flour, spooned and leveled, and then I removed 5 tablespoons of the flour and added in 5 tablespoons of cornstarch and gave it a good mix. And you're going to want to use cake flour for this recipe because it makes for a really, really fluffy cake. Make sure you give this a really good mix, and then we're going to set the flour mixture aside. Now moving on to our wet ingredients, I'm using 3/4 cup of unsalted butter at room temperature, and then 1 2/3 cup of granulated sugar. And then we're going to mix this until light and fluffy, about medium speed. Once it's done, it's going to look about like that right there. And then we're going to add in 5 large egg whites. Now, I use liquid egg whites. You can measure out your own from an egg, but I feel like it'd be less wasteful if you had liquid egg whites. And that would be about 3/4 a cup, and 3 tablespoons would equal 5 large egg whites. And then we're going to give that a good mix. Just a reminder, make sure you're scraping your bowl in between intervals so we're making sure all these ingredients are mixed together evenly. Moving on to our flavoring, we're going to use 1 teaspoon of coconut extract, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and then a ½ cup of room temperature sour cream. Using sour cream with cake flour is really the secret to getting a fluffy and moist cake. It comes out perfect every single time that I use these ingredients together. Make sure you give this a good mix until just combined. Now it's time for our flour mixture and our coconut milk. Remember, we made 2½ cups of cake flour, and then you're going to need 1 cup of unsweetened canned coconut milk. So we're going to pour in just a little bit of the flour and a little bit of the coconut milk, and do this in intervals until all the ingredients are used up. Don't throw this all in at one time, or you're going to have a really thick batter, and you don't want that. That's not going to make for a very fluffy, moist cake. Give this a good mix. I was able to break these ingredients down into 3 or 4 intervals just for your information. After all that's mixed, you're going to need to add in 1 cup of sweetened shredded coconut. I forgot to record this. Now we're going to evenly distribute the batter into our 3 greased cake pans. And again, this is why I like using the flour and Crisco mixture, because that way I make sure my pans are all ready to go and I don't have to take an extra step right before I get ready to pour the batter in. Give them a good shake so you make sure they're even before putting them in the oven. I baked these for at least 21 minutes on the dot. You may have to cook them 25 minutes. And this is what they're going to look like when they're done. You can tell they're done when the cake is pulling away from the pan. And as you can see, no sticking, and a very moist cake. Make sure you let your cake layers lay out and cool off on the stove on a wire rack for about an hour. Now moving on to our icing, I'm throwing in 1 cup of unsalted butter, room temperature. And then I'm adding in an 8-ounce block of full-fat cream cheese, this room temperature. And then we're going to give this a good mix until light and fluffy. Now moving on to the flavoring of our icing. You're going to add in 5 cups of confectioner's sugar, 2 tablespoons of canned coconut milk, a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a half a teaspoon of coconut extract. And then an 1/8 teaspoon of salt and maybe just a dash of vanilla bean paste. You don't have to do that, but I like doing that. And then we're going to give this a good mix until fully combined. I know my video's out of order, so just bear with me. I forgot to record a few ingredients that I put in here. So just make sure you're following the directions and the ingredients written in the description. Now it's time to prepare for the cake assembly. After your cake layers have cooled and your icing is made, we get ready to assemble the cake. I'm starting off by taking a little bit of icing and putting it on my cake plate just so the bottom layer has a little something to stick to and it doesn't move around. Now gently lay your first layer down and make sure it's secure. Now I'm going to start putting my icing on top of this layer. You're going to use just a little less than half a cup of icing to go on top for you measurers out there. Make sure you spread it evenly. You're going to want to make sure you got a thick layer of icing on top so you can really see and taste the layers when you do cut into the cake. And then you're going to repeat this for the next 2 layers, ending with some icing on the top. Now here you see me lining up my cake and make sure it's even with all the other layers. And if you want to, you can even buy some tools at the store that will help you ensure you get the perfect level for your cakes. Now we're going to start crumb coating our cake. This is going to be the first layer of icing on the sides and tops of your cake to make sure when you go in for your second layer that you don't start pulling off pieces of the cake. So you're going to want to do your crumb coating and do a thin layer of icing around the sides and the top and then put it in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to go back and re-icing the cake again. And you can do this as many times over until all your icing is used. Just make sure, however, that after each layer of icing, you set it in the fridge for a period of 25 to 30 minutes to let it harden up enough so that you can continue layering on the icing without any issues. And last but not least, we're going to put on our garnish, and this is sweetened shredded coconut. And see, your layer of icing doesn't have to be pretty for this cake because this shredded coconut is going to cover it. So make sure you do this over all of the top and all of the sides of the coconut cake. And you can even add some other garnishments, just whatever you desire to your coconut cake. And yes, I'm frying chicken in the background. Don't mind me. I've got to get my family fed. And this will equal out to about 2 cups of sweetened shredded coconut. I'm using the Great Value brand. And once again, this is another messy step, but it is well worth it because this is such a beautiful cake when you're done. It reminds me so much of the cakes that my grandmother used to do. However, she used to add way more layers than I did. I think she would take 3 cake layers and cut them in half, making 6 total layers. And it was so good and so moist every time. And even though this is 3 layers and not exactly like hers, it reminds me so much of hers. And here's the finished product. If y'all are looking to make more Southern traditional recipes, go give my channel a follow and be watching out for new videos. Thank y'all.